Tēnā koutou katoa and shalom. Your Excellency, the Right Honourable Dame Patsy Reddy, Your Worship, Honourable Phil Goff, Members of Parliament, members of the Diplomatic Corps, councillors, survivors, survivor families, ladies and gentlemen. Every year we do come together to honour the victims and survivors of the Holocaust and to remember. And as Juliet has said, this year we are focusing on the resistance and resilience of survivors. It was 67 years ago my family came to New Zealand. My mother, Inga Wolf, who became the founding director of the Holocaust Centre, her mum, Greta Ponga, and her young brother, John. They came to join family, Teddy Stiasny, Paul Stanton, and their families. My mother recalls the terrifying day the Nazis marched into Vienna on the 15th of March 1938, her home surrounded by neighbours happily waving swastikas and welcoming Hitler's army. My Czech grandfather, Evgen Ponga, had been through pogroms and he knew what was happening. Listening to the Austrian Chancellor Schuschnigg, he turned to the family and said, "What are we waiting for?" There came for a knock at the door. In the middle of the night, brown shirts demanded Omama's brothers, Paul, Carl and Teddy, open their motorbike and sewing machine shop. It was looted and overnight they were poor. My mother, Opapa and Omama moved to Prague as it had not yet been overrun. By then, Omama's brothers had all escaped. Carl to Palestine, Teddy and Paul trekking secretly by night over the border. But Teddy's wife, Bertel, had no passport, so she was stuck in Vienna. She looked a little like my grandmother. So Opapa returned to Vienna, and using Omama's passport, Bertel and Opapa posed as husband and wife so Bertel could escape. A Lutheran church in Mayava was converting Jews to try and save them. My mother remembers kneeling between her parents in a dark church and being baptised. Omama was so ashamed of this, she never ever talked of it. They spent the last of their money on a return flight at a time when my Omama, characteristically positive, said only film stars flew. But the flight to freedom left from Berlin. So that's where they went. The trip from Prague to Berlin was the last day they could use their passports, the day before Hitler's troops occupied Czechoslovakia. They were the only civilians in the carriage, carrying just a bag each, pretending they were going on holiday. Mum remembers wearing a small gold cross, as if that was going to save them, and her parents told her not to cause any attention to be paid to them. When they finally arrived in England, they pleaded for refugee status, and thankfully, they were allowed to stay. They had escaped, but they left behind cherished family. My mother's paternal grandparents, Adolf and Carlotta Ponga, murdered in Sobibor. Her aunt Rosina Pongarova, murdered in Auschwitz. Her grandfather, David Stiasny, beaten by the Nazis and died as a result in Vienna. Her grandmother, Rosalia Stiasny, who escaped to Palestine, only to be thwarted by a British blockade, and who died on the Patria when it was blown up in Haifa harbour. And extended family and friends, of course, never seen again, all murdered. And now, the descendants of Greta and Evgen Ponga live in Israel, in Australia, and here in New Zealand. We survived and we thrived. Our story is unique and utterly ordinary. It is a story that's repeated over and over, stories of resilience, courage, and luck. Stories of anguish, despair, and murder told 6 million times over. At the Holocaust Centre of New Zealand, our mandate has 4 parts: to bear witness to the Holocaust, to remember, to educate, and to act. And I want to give you just a tiny glimpse of what we do to ensure that we meet our mandate. We intend that every single New Zealand child will learn about the Holocaust. Last year, with teaching framed on-site, off-site and online, we taught over 10,000 students and visited 65 schools. This year, we are set to teach even greater numbers. We developed 7 online teaching modules. The hashtag Just One Week campaign, endorsed by the History Teachers Association of New Zealand, enables at least 1 week of Holocaust education. In 6 months, we registered 236 teachers and 168 schools into that program. We hope we can send teachers once again to Yad Vashem, but if COVID prevents us, we have a program so that the Yad Vashem alumni of teachers will upskill other teachers. A seminar to upskill teachers in Auckland is planned for the 1st of March, and others in Wellington, Dunedin and Christchurch. A new travelling trunk project provides schools with all the materials that they need to teach the Holocaust. The trunks were fully booked out this year within a week of our offering them. Our 6-part webinar series, which averaged 50 teachers per webinar, is being rerun. The Anne Frank travelling exhibition has had over 150,000 visitors and will travel to more centres. It's fully booked up for 2 years. We translated the diary of Anne Frank into Te Reo Māori, and it's continuing to be sold and used in schools. Our 5-person staff and 40 volunteers deal with 40 student inquiries every week. We are about to take possession and make available 4,000 Holocaust-related books gifted from the National Library. The Children's Holocaust Memorial, with its 1.5 buttons, one for every child,